Hello and welcome to the Next 100 Days podcast. My name is Graham Arrowsmith.
And my name's Kevin Appleby. Graham, we often talk about corporate escape on this podcast.
Yeah, we do.
But, there are many, many models you can take to do that. And one that I'm seeing increasingly is people taking on a portfolio career. And I think we've got an expert with us to talk about that today.
We certainly do. He shares your first name, but it's Kevan with an A, or Kevin with an A, Hall. So Kevan Hall. Kevin, welcome to the Next 100 Days podcast.
Thank you.
You are an expert when it comes to this, and you very recent. We want to talk mainly today about something you've brought to the market called Your Portfolio Life. And there's some really remarkable things about that, but we'll get to that. So tell us a little bit about your story, your backstory, and how you got to this thing called Your Portfolio Life.
Okay, well, I had the kind of, I guess, an untypical corporate career, but a corporate career with large multinationals where I moved to countries. I did a whole range of different functions from HR to manufacturing to sales to geographic expansion, found myself helping set up new businesses in Eastern Europe after the fall of communism. And I kind of got very interested in how people were successful in that very complex world, working across cultures, working remotely even 30 years ago. And so I developed some training around working remotely, around matrix management. And I spent the next 30 years really focusing on helping people be successful in very complex organizations. Built a company, do a few other things on the side, so I had a little bit of a portfolio going myself, invested in some technology companies. And then I got into my early 60s and I started thinking, well, what do I do next? I've got members of the family coming through who are keen to get me out the way over the next few years. I do think I'm going to stay involved in that business, but how was I going to spend my time? And one of the things I found really early on is about 90% of people in the UK retire with a financial plan, but only 10% have a plan of how they're going to spend their time. And I thought, well, that seems a bit strange. And there wasn't really much support for people planning it. And of course, I have a lot of friends my own age, and I started to talk to them, and they were kind of worried about retiring, and they're thinking about what am I going to do? And particularly for the real high achievers, it just felt like their identity and everything was dropping off a cliff. And so the more I had these conversations, and I'm a bit of an obsessive reader and researcher, and so my instinct when something is like this is just to hoover up every bit of information I could find. So I must have read 100 books, and I followed the academic trails back to the source research and all of those things. And as a trainer, I'm always looking for how do I turn this into tools and techniques, make it applicable. So I started to do some stuff for myself. And then I was talking to my son, Alan, and he was saying, well, it's not just people facing retirement. He's in his early 30s, thinking about the rest of his career. How does he want to spend his life and his relationships? And then my nephew said, yeah, I'm just starting my first job after university. And Gen Z are asking, what's this all about? Do I actually want to go to work? What kind of life do I want? And my daughter was off on maternity leave and saying, yeah, it's a big life change, this maternity. How do I want to spend my time? And so I kind of went out into this kind of search for purpose and meaning. And it seems that particularly after COVID, about 50% of people are asking, what do I want to do with my life? We've got things like the Great Resignation going on, where people are kind of churning jobs, looking for something better. And I thought, it's a bit of a random process at the moment. We all go through these life transitions. If you think about life, actually, life is pretty much just transitions. You leave home, you kind of you study, you move out, you kind of have a family, you kind of it just goes on and on and on through to retirement and death eventually. Yeah. And so life is the transitions, and the stuff that happens in between is just a chance to pause and draw breath.
Unless of course you live in Manchester when death usually occurs a little bit before you die. But
yeah, and that was the traditional model of retirement, wasn't it? I think when retirement was first introduced at 65, life expectancy was 67. So it's a massive challenge.
It is. And what a fascinating career, and this whole idea of understanding of honing techniques that can actually help people, I suppose in a way, spend their time and spend their money, if you like, wisely, whether that's in retirement or a particular life event. Have you got in mind any noticeable life events that you think these techniques will work best at?
Can I say, first of all, it's not about how you spend your money. And I've stayed away from that deliberately because I'm not an expert in finances. And also the massive industry out there who's looking for people at these stages and trying to get hold of their money. And so I don't want to be part of that. I want to be focusing on the other things, how people spend their time. Because to me, your life is how you spend your hours. It's quite granular. And so I think one of the interesting things about life, let's be philosophical for a moment, is it's getting a lot longer and a lot more complex. I mean, in terms of life expectancy, if you're born in the UK today, you could expect on average to live to 90. That means a lot of people have got to live to 100. And so if you're planning a 100-year life, it looks quite different. For me, I'm only 2/3 of the way through. And people are talking about retiring and doing nothing. That sounds crazy to me. So I think but the decisions you make earlier in your life, every time you reach one of these branching points, I can think back when I was 16. Are you an arts or a sciences person? Well, I don't know. I'm 16. I'm an idiot. Well, actually, we think you're an arts person. So that closes off a whole lot of options at age 16 based on no good information apart from what your teachers thought or what league tables they were part of nowadays. And then I chose a university course. Nobody in my family ever went to university. I didn't have any advice on that. I just chose something that kind of looked interesting. And then at the end of it, I needed a job. So I took a job, and we make these decisions. And the decisions we make early in our life have a massive impact on the rest of our lives in terms of our identity, our wealth, all those kind of things. So I think, whilst I originally started thinking about retirement as a big discontinuous change, and interestingly, in retirement's when you get to make the choices. So it isn't your employer, your teacher, your parents kind of guiding you. It's just, what do you want to do now? So that's a big one. But I think, if you're, that kind of midlife crisis time, if you're in your 30s and 40s, which, by the way, should probably be renamed third life crisis now as we live it longer. But those ones are going to have a big impact if you get your life sorted then.
I don't know about you, Kevin, but I mean, well, both Kevin Appleby and myself are in our 60s now, and about the same age as yourself. But so basically, we've gone through these different life stages, and yes, that there is an occasional. Kevin referred right at the beginning to this corporate escape story. That's almost an example of the way in which people are recalibrating the things that they want from life. Don't want to be sitting in a cubicle in a big business, frankly, a business that doesn't really care for me. Couldn't give a monkeys whether I'm there or not. Versus one where you've got a stake in whatever you're doing, and so in a way, from a work point of view, you're actually moving on in that way. Now, the way I'm sort of interpreting what your portfolio life can do for people is that it's almost saying, how can you build a sort of a meaningful, happy life? And you almost have to take inputs to do that. It's not about somebody just magically going to snap their fingers and you're going to be happy. You've got to work at it. And so presumably this is a series of things that you're going to intervene in their lives with. So can you give us a bit more information about that?
Yeah. So what I by instinct, I'm a trainer and a communicator. That's what I enjoy doing. So I research that, and then I like to kind of share it with people. So that came out of, by the way, my own coaching. Age 60 something, I realized actually that's what I really love. My passion is actually learning stuff. And so I applied that to this. And what I wanted to do was to kind of find things that were well researched, practical stuff that was well researched, because there's the self-help industry, and you look on the internet, there's a massive rubbish, personal opinions and people telling you, your life must be like this. If you don't base your life around God, you'll never be anything. If you don't base your life around community, health is everything. So I cut out all of that stuff and looked for the stuff that was really well researched. And there is a lot of good stuff out there. There's a lot of good stuff about how you engineer in happiness, which sounds crazy, but what are the real practical things you can do? So a very simple example, 3 things you can do to feel happier immediately. Number 1, do a kindness for somebody else. Doesn't matter what it is. Be nice to somebody. Second thing, express gratitude. Third thing, just set aside some time to savor the good stuff that happened this week. Now, those are real simple principles, but they can have a real big impact in terms of your mood and how you feel about things. So there's lots of, and these are all very well researched. They're not kind of just some social worker telling you they think it's important. So I try to collect those kind of things and bring them together. There are then a number of areas around living a good life. And this is, by the way, very cultural. If you read the US stuff, it always must start with your God. If you read the Japanese stuff, it's all about your community. So it varies a lot by culture. So I kind of collected 50 of these different models and I put them on a big spreadsheet and I said, which ones come up all the time? Which ones are consistently important? And number one was a life of meaning. And so we start off by getting people to think about, I read books that said, so what is your life purpose? That's a big old question, isn't it? And so what we found is you have to kind of sneak up on your life purpose. So we start by getting people to understand their values. What do you believe in? What do you think is important? So start with your values. And a good life is living in harmony with your values. And if you look back over your life, the high points are probably when you were able to live your values, and the low points were probably the ones where you had to compromise your values. And so we start with values. Then we look at strengths. And a strength in our languages is something that you're good at and enjoy. It's not something you learned to do because you had to do because you were doing your professional qualifications in accountancy. It's the stuff you enjoy doing, the stuff you're probably always good at. And if you build a life around your strengths, then you're likely to enjoy what you're doing. The third is passions, which always turns the Brits off. I mean, I'm from Yorkshire, and so the idea of passion, a little bit, I went, oh yeah, passion, tell me about it. So what we do is try and get to look at people. Some people do have a passion. You read these books about somebody aged 8 who heard a piano for the first time and never wanted to do anything else but be a concert pianist. But there aren't many of those about. No. The rest of us, we might have a passion. It might be a golf or horse riding or in my case, learning. We have a lot of other things that we enjoy and others that are just okay. So we try and get people to think about, how do I move the things I do up that enjoyment scale? So towards a passion, if you have one. And once you've got clear about your values, about your strengths and about your passions, then you can come back and say, so let me try and bring this together. What's my purpose? So we use a format called to in order to. So my purpose is to do this in order to do that. So what am I trying to do and why am I trying to do it? So that first block is about bringing clarity around what gives you meaning. And what's nice about that is that then becomes a guideline. Because when you're selecting the other things we're going to talk about, the work you do, your leisure, your hobbies, etc., you can say, does this help me live my values? Does it engage my strengths? Does it move me towards more enjoyment and passion? And does it advance my purpose? And if it does, it's likely to be a great thing to do. So that's that whole bit about purpose. And then we go into a number of segments of life which seem to be important in the application of that. So work. People spend 40% of their waking time for 40 years at work. So if you aren't happy at work, you have no chance of, on balance, having a happy life. Yet the Gallup Global Survey this last year showed that only 20% of people were engaged at work. Wow. 20% are miserable and 60% are emotionally disengaged. I work with a lot of large corporates in my other life, and they spend a lot of time surveying engagement. And they do big surveys and they come out with all the results, and then they beat up their HR and managers and their leaders to engage other people. Well, you can create an engaging environment, but you can't engage someone else. I can't give you purpose and engagement. So we flipped that around in your portfolio life and said, if you're not engaged at work, that's your problem. If your boss enables you to do it, that's great. But it is no consolation at your retirement party to say, well, I had a miserable 40 years, but it was my boss's fault. So a lot of that's about, how do I create my own engagement? How do I craft my own role to make it closer to the things that give me meaning? So how do I take in any job, you can adapt it. You can change the tasks to a certain extent. You can certainly work on the relationships, and you can entirely work on your own mindset and attitude and reframe what you get out of work. So there's a big segment about that. There's a big segment about leisure. There's some real interesting work on the concept of flow, where they ask people at different times during their life, how are you feeling right now? What are you doing? How are you feeling? and I'm carefully skirting around using the name of the Hungarian psychologist whose work this is. His name is Mihail Csikszentmihalyi or something like that. It's something very Hungarian. But if you look at the concept of flow, you'll find that very quickly.
Mm.
And what he found is that people reported being in that sense of being in the moment, being in the zone, really focusing 3 times more often at work than at leisure. But if you ask them what they'd rather be doing, they always said they'd rather be at leisure. And if you think about it, we're never really trained to use our leisure. So in the UK, the average adult spends 22.5 hours a day in front of the TV. Does that make you feel engaged and fulfilled? So, yes, we need some downtime and some vegetable time. We all kind of need that. And this isn't about constantly being busy, But if we could replace that 1 hour a day of mindless screen time with something more active, like reading a good book or going out with friends or something like that, that makes quite a big difference. 7 hours a week of more engagement in your life. And if we can then add on, if we can take the most boring hour of things we do at work and turn it into something interesting, suddenly we're making a big difference in people's lives. So those numerically, work and leisure, those are 2 big blocks of time that we want to work on. And then within that, there's some enabling things like the quality of your relationships, your ability to continue to learn and grow as a person over time. So we kind of get into very practical techniques for doing those things.
That sounds like an awful lot of things to consider when you're in this situation. And right, so I'm now going to put myself into the position of coming along to your portfolio life. What do I first of all, how do I find you? Well, it's yourportfoliolife.com.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to the website. How would I engage with you? And how will it be obvious to you how you can best help me?
Yeah, I'm a trainer, so I try and package things up. There's quite a big industry. I'm sure we all know of life coaching in the UK and internationally. And with a life coach, you have the chance to sit down and talk with somebody in detail about things specific to you. We do offer some individual coaching around the process and the tools we've been talking about, so you can engage with that. But life coaching with someone good is pretty expensive to do individually. We've also found that there's a demand for people to have these conversations with other people who are going through life transitions. So, what we've looked at is 3 things. The first is workshops. So you can get face-to-face in a room with other people who are going through life transitions and talk about these issues. And that's incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
There's webinars. Webinars are a good way of getting access to people who maybe don't have the time to get together for a day or 2. We'll take you through the same tools and we'll create interactions on that. Or the third way is kind of individual coaching. So all of those options are available on the site. There's also, some people can't afford to go down that route. So we've made other resources available for free on the site. And we're just finishing a book, which hopefully will be published end of this year, early next year. So we want to kind of get those ideas out there. But in terms of engaging directly with us, then really what we'd like to provide is this kind of really research-based tools and techniques, practical approach, expert coaches, and the ability to work with other people to kind of discuss it and bring it alive. We found those 3 things really help.
Just think about the coaching. Kevin's probably more attuned to this than myself, but the idea of a coach coming into my life, how do you pick the coaches that can actually really help people, or are they existing life coaches and you just slot them in? Do they have a particular bent to their coaching?
So I'm in the learning and development industry, so I'm a big believer in coaching. So when I go for coaches, I go for real good ones, which is kind of a luxury that I've enjoyed for a long time. So, for example, a few years ago, I took up rallying. And I got as my coach Pentti Ricola, who kind of coaches some of the Formula One drivers, and he was massively overqualified for coaching an amateur like me. But you learn so much from these guys. So I went out and I found a really good guy called Steve Chamberlain, who wrote a book called On Purpose, which was focusing particularly on that purpose side of what we were talking about. And I used Steve as my coach, and I learned a lot from him. I found a lot of the people who are in life coaching are what I call non-directive coaches. So they'll ask you lots of questions. So how do you feel about that? What would you like to do? There is some value in that. You need to do some of that in the coaching. But I kind of like a coach who's got a process.
Yeah.
I'm going to lead you through this stuff, and that's what we've tried to create, which is, first of all, we're going to help you clarify your values. We're not doing it for you, but we've got some tools and some conversations to help you do that. So I like coaches who've got some structure, who are leading you through a process, and also, by the way, asking lots of questions as well, rather than something which is a bit fluffy, if you know what I mean, where, so I've been through tough times before, tell me about it.
And okay, so going back then, so coaching at all kinds of levels, but a particularly high level and probably a little bit more expensive. The webinars, interactive webinars, discussions with people who get into your program, and presumably they're learning at different paces. They all have different observations. In a webinar setting, is it easy to at least allow other people to give more than just simply comments, or are we talking about sort of Zoom webinars where people can actually see other people talking?
Yeah, we're talking about seeing other people. The groups are not very large.
Right.
So what we'll do is give them some tools and frameworks. There'll be some kind of pre-work to do outside of the webinars. We'll give them some tools or frameworks. We'll pick out some examples. If you can't get everyone to talk all of the time, but we'll get people to talk, and we'll give them some breakout time as well to discuss these topics with other people. The nice thing about webinars in all of our work is you do a webinar, you give people a kind of boost of stuff, and then they can go away and work on it for a week. And that is quite nice. And some of this stuff is, when I started to reflect on my purpose, I mean, you'd think as someone who's had a career in learning development, I'd have a pretty good idea of my purpose. And I probably did, like 60%, but I probably spent 2 months really, really reflecting and working on that. And it kept waking me up, and I kept going back to it and revisiting it. And it wasn't unrecognizable by the time I finished. But the insights that I got out of that process took a long time to come through.
Just explain that, because I'm not quite sure why that would have been the case for you.
Yeah. So, for example, when I started my own business 30 years ago, it was real clear to me that the driver was autonomy.
Right.
I realized all stress in my life was caused by other idiots who didn't agree with me.
Yeah. I think that might be a Yorkshire trait.
Could well be, couldn't it? And so, unsurprisingly, 30 years later, autonomy was still on my list. Yeah. So your real values are present in your life. But when I started thinking about my passions, I thought, and this, I'd always thought this was a problem, is what I tend to do is that I get really interested in something and I obsess about it, and then I lose interest in it. Right. And so my loft has a large collection of plastic boxes with all of the equipment for magic or whittling or rallying was another example of that. And I do it for maybe a year, and I do it in depth, and I'll have read every book you've ever heard of in that subject during that time. And I, quite rightly, my wife criticizes me for, we're getting all the kit again. Here we go. But what I realized through that process of reflection is what I really love is the learning. Yeah. It's not actually what it is. It's, and when I'm in that zone, everything else goes out the window. I read about it. I kind of follow every train of thought. I buy the best books. I try and find a good coach. I get a bit of the equipment. I try it out. 2 weeks ago, I spent a day with a mad sculptor up in Derbyshire who was completely carving and building his own house, and it was a wonderful day learning wood carving. Will I go on and have a career as a woodcarver? No. Have I bought all some really expensive chisels? Yes. so and that was a really good insight for me, because I actually feel a lot better about my kind of temporary passions, if you like.
So learning then is right at the center of your being. So it's just to pick up on something you said earlier, Kevin. It's not God and it's not community. It's for you, it's learning. It's neither one of the extremities, but it's learning.
I think that's my passion. Yeah. So I think within my values, if you had to say what is the number one value for me, it would be family.
Yeah, so I see. Okay.
And I think most of the research on having a good life says you need to connect with something beyond yourself. Yes. If you don't, that's okay. It's your choice, but that will have consequences. And the research seems to show that people who connect with others have a happier life. Yeah. And so for me, family is at the top of that tree.
And you can see from the point of religion as well as community that those are two connecting with others and something beyond yourself.
Absolutely. And if that is what gives you meaning, that's great.
Yeah.
What I object to a little bit is these very prescriptive things that say it has to be this.
Yeah. No.
Because as a Yorkshireman, again, I would say, well, if it has to be this, it definitely isn't going to be.
Yeah. Well,
so we kind of have a process to help people find out what's valuable for them rather than telling them what it should be.
So when Kevin gets rid of me on the podcast, he's got a natural replacement, hasn't he? Another Yorkshireman with strong views.
Yeah, strong views, absolutely. Yeah. But
okay, but
Kevin, in the title of what we're talking about is the word portfolio. How exactly does portfolio come into this?
Yeah. Well, obviously, in a financial portfolio, you kind of spread your risk by having a range of different products and instruments. Charles Handy, management thinker, I think back in the 80s, wrote a book called The Empty Raincoat. And in that book, he talked about the portfolio career. And he said, that traditional career of join one company, march up the ladder until you reach the top or retire, was being replaced by a lot more kind of instrumental relationships. So you might have multiple jobs, you might, what we call now the gig economy or side hustles or those kind of things. And it was unlikely in the future you'd have one job that would satisfy all your financial and other needs, and you need a range of jobs. So we've kind of extended that concept and said it's about a portfolio life. So the chance of any one area of your life, whether it's work or hobbies or whatever, doing everything you need. So giving you, exercising your values, your strengths, your purpose and your passion is quite small. If you have a job that does all of those things, be happy and stay there. That's great. But let's say I've decided to be an accountant, and in my soul, I'm a painter. I'm unlikely to get to exercise that creativity as part of my job. So maybe I need a hobby that allows me to tap into that. So we're looking at how do you put together a portfolio of activities that leaves you feeling fulfilled and engaged. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. Yes,
it does. Is it a percentage thing? Is it sort of 40, 40, 20? You could make up any set of numbers, but basically, you were talking about different sort of aspects to this. Yeah. Is there a sort of almost a formulaic thing that says, well, by tapping up in this area, you're going to end up with a more fulfilled life?
Well, I think the ones I mentioned before in terms of how people spend their time, if you're at work, you're spending 40% of your time, of your waking time at work. So start there, I would say. And whether that's working for yourself, working for a company, whatever, make the best out of that you possibly can. And by the way, I don't know if you've seen this kind of stuff in the press at the moment about quiet quitting or all this absolute rubbish. There is no area of life where putting less into it gives you a better result, and so I despair of this idea that by not working hard, by not putting everything into it, you're going to have a happier life. It's just not going to happen. So I'd start with work, and then I'd look at my kind of leisure and hobbies, interests, and my relationships.
I think I saw I don't know, a TikTok or YouTube. I don't have TikTok, but it comes out on other channels, and this lad was it was picked up by American media. That's where I saw it. And basically the lad was saying, well, I don't think I have to work. I don't want to work. And it was going on like, why should I be made to work? It's well, I should really have free housing and a choice as to whether I'm going to work, and free healthcare, etc. And it was almost oblivious to the fact that the world don't work that way. You got to work and you got to earn some money, but that don't mean to say, to your point, doesn't mean to say you can't infuse whatever you're doing with some sort of purpose to it that'll bring you joy. Yeah. And I think it was just so sad. His parents must be, well, I don't know. They're either beside themselves or they're not
supporting it,
they're enabling it. At the end of the day, it was so sad to see somebody of what, I don't know, 20, 25, I don't know what it was, but basically more or less giving up on life.
Yeah. And then that shapes your mindset. So now my mindset is work is an imposition. I'm not going to enjoy it when I do find I have to do work. On the other side, there's some great positive things out there. I saw on Instagram just at random a couple of months ago, popped up on my feed, a guy, it looked like it was kind of in Southeast Asia somewhere, in a coffee shop. There's somebody having a coffee shop and they were filming, and this guy came to clean the windows. Yeah. And he walked up to the windows, you could see him in the background, put his earphones in, turned his music on, and he got 2 squeegees, and he started washing the window in time to the music, and he was having a great time. And at the end of it, the whole coffee shop gave you a round of applause. And I thought, there's a guy who's taken something as mundane as washing windows, and he's turned it into a dance, and so that's what I'd like to encourage people to do, rather than quietly quit and live a life of despair and then go home and watch telly.
It's like the postman who whistles. He's having a really good time. Because he's out there walking, delivering mail. What a wonderful job. It's just so. I just think there's it's how you. I guess portfolio is one. I've probably mentioned this to you before, Kevin, but portfolio is a word that I find difficult because it's a long word. And actually, I could probably get my head around it. But the truth is, if you're living your life and you've got a job and you're maybe, I don't know, a nurse or a teacher or something, how does that word portfolio, because the other 2 words are your life. How else can you interpret portfolio that brings meaning to people of in different worlds? What is that thing that says portfolio? What does it mean?
Yeah, well, I think kind of maybe it's work-life balance. Some people would kind of tag it under that. If you've got a full-time job, then do you want to do something part-time on top of that? Maybe you don't. Maybe you focus on your hobbies. But still, if I'm a nurse, there's a lot I can do about the way I do my job. And you see that. You see the difference in a barista in a coffee shop. Some of them are engaging you, they're having a good time, others are just miserable. I'm sure people listen to me saying, it's easy for you to say you're CEO of a company and all the rest. But the first 4 years of my working career, I worked on turkey farms. Right, I didn't get a tremendous amount of intellectual stimulation out of being on a turkey farm, so I had to do other things, studying and those kind of things in the back.
I thought they were great conversationalists. Just not about Christmas. Don't mention Christmas.
Don't mention Christmas.
I mentioned it once, but I think I got away with it. But no, it's
and there were people on that farm who did the job really well and had great fun, and there were people on that farm who were kind of pretty miserable because it's a fairly lousy job. But there's some interesting research that shows that genetics has a big part in happiness. For example, there's studies of twins that showed that about half of the variation between people in levels of happiness is genetic. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, you can say, well, it's not my fault, it's my genes. All genes do is predispose you to something. Whether you express that or not is down to your behaviors and activities. And you can change your happiness by your mindset, by your activities, by the way you address something, whatever that thing is.
Yeah. So you're starting with this thing which is to do with work. You might be, and you're almost like drawing circles around it that says, I could be doing different things, and some of it is to do with the way I'm doing it. Like you were saying with the barista, the happy postman, the guy in a restaurant in America who was, they were sat watching him clear tables unbelievably quickly. But with so much skill, but it was a sort of round of applause after it. It was that amazing sort of level of skill that somebody was displaying, way beyond anybody else that you'd ever seen in your life. That is it that's this is what it's all about, Kevin? Is it what you're trying to do is to give people the opportunity to see they can be the whistling postman, or they can be something else? Is that the essence of what this is all about?
It's partly that. So, for example, with mindset, you can teach people how to reframe their experiences, to look at them differently. And once you change your mindset, then what your brain does is looks for evidence that you're right. So if you change the way you think, you'll start to, it's like you start thinking about yellow cars, you see them everywhere. And so you can change the mindset. But also, going back to this example of the person who's great at waiting tables, we're also doing some corporate work on this, around helping people build engagement. And I was at a conference for top managers of a US company in Portugal a couple of months ago, and we were talking about how you achieve this state of flow. And so that state of flow is when you're addressing above average challenges with above average skills. So I just split them into two, and I said, you people on that side, think about a situation where you feel like you've got more skills than you're being challenged. So your capability is ahead of what you've been asked to do. And you people, the opposite. Where do you feel like you haven't got the skills to achieve the challenges you've been given?
Right.
And so I got people to shout out examples. And I said, so those of you who don't feel you've got the skills, get some. work on your skills in that area, because then you'll elevate. You'll be now operating at a higher level with higher challenges. You'll find flow. Those of you who've got the skills and your challenges aren't high enough, guess what? Take on bigger challenges. And so sometimes it's really simple, and people went, oh yeah. So I kind of like stuff that's really simple and practical. And if you get into that, you're almost in an arms race then. I build more skills, I take on more challenge, I build more skills. And I vividly remember that in my short career as a rally driver. Every time you would build another level of skill, and then you'd start going faster, and you'd terrify yourself, and then you do a little bit better, and then you'd have to build more skill. And it was a constant process of balancing those things. And the more you did it, the better you got at it.
Are there other challenges that you face, though, when people have, for instance, to take your example, where somebody has the skills, but the challenges are not bringing the best out of those skills? Are they in a comfort zone that might be something that says, I really don't want to do this?
Yeah, I think so. And I think inertia is a huge, one of the areas that we haven't talked about is this area of lifelong learning. And what drives learning is curiosity. And, I think a lot of people are put off about the idea of learning. It means going to a dusty classroom and being told what my curriculum is. Yeah. But as an adult, you don't have to do that stuff. It can be driven by your curiosity. And so how do we stimulate that curiosity? I mean, it's never been easy to access information than it is now. I mean, if anything you can imagine, there's 100,000 YouTube videos explaining how you do it. And so it's the trigger for it. And for me, learning is about how you get from where you are now to where you want to be. So it's around your goals. Yeah. And the book, obviously, we hope is going to be a good start for triggering that journey. But whatever you're doing, whatever life stage you're at, my daughter just had her second baby recently. And can you imagine how much information there is for a new parent nowadays?
It's huge. Absolutely huge.
Absolutely huge. So there isn't a lack of information. I mean, it might be hard to work out which of it is credible and useful, but it's about that kind of curiosity to seek it out and then apply it. So we spend quite a bit of time sharing with people, what's the research on how can you structure your goal setting and your review processes, etc., to make it more likely that you'll build positive habits and that you'll succeed. Because we know for a fact that willpower doesn't work, right, in most things. Any of us have tried to lose weight, no, willpower's not enough.
This, I don't know about you, Kevin Appleby, but this feels to me that it's such a broad subject that there's absolutely no end of stuff you could put into it. Isn't that one of your challenges? It is so broad.
It is, and in the half hour before this podcast, I was working on that kind of chapter about those areas of life, and that's why I did that comparison, because you can't, every time you speak to somebody, there's another aspect that comes out of this. So you've got to prioritize, and so what we've prioritized on is the stuff that seems to come out in all the research is important. There's a couple, by the way, that we've chosen not to prioritize, which are on that list. Right. One is mental and physical well-being, and the other is financial well-being. Now, those are both important elements of life, the kind of underpinnings, but we haven't really got anything new to say about that. Everyone kind of knows what they should do. Get enough sleep, don't eat too much, take regular exercise. That information is all out there. And during the pandemic, we were trying to do some work on well-being for people, through webinars, through their employers. And it's hard to find something new to say. We just don't do it, and financial well-being is the same. We all know we should save. We all know we should have a budget. We all know,
But taking out mental health and all that kind of stuff, which is there's legions of that stuff. People talking about it all the time, and taking out financial, which is completely understandable because there's legions in that area as well. You've still got a huge range of things because you're talking about how humans behave.
No, I agree. But then if you look at how people spend their time, I guess our philosophy is the quality of your life is how you spend your hours. So if you can take 40% of your waking life at work and improve it 10%, if you can take the 25 to 40%, which is leisure, and improve it by 10%, you're moving on. And if you can do 10%, and you can always do 10%, so why can't you do 20? And so it's a kind of, hopefully there will be some things that are life-changing, but a lot of stuff's incremental. just do a little bit better job of that. I mean, I set myself a target when I started reading this of, started thinking about this, is just, starting watching TV an hour later.
Right. Yeah.
And suddenly that was 2 hours later, and so it sounds really simple, but it does make a big difference.
So he's just not watching Coronation Street anymore.
We can tape. You can. Well, I'm showing my age by calling it. My kids always mock me when I say you can tape it. Tape it. What's it?
Yeah.
But we can record it. You should say.
There's a change in our house that watching live TV is almost never.
No.
Everything we watch is recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I think it's so important an idea, because if in that time when it is your time, it's not somebody else's time, or it's not your time that you're devoting to a business, then doing that extra, doing those other things that are going to bring you joy, or whatever the right word is, fulfillment, engagement, whatever it is, that's valuable. And I think what you're saying there, Kevin, is that at the end of the day, you as a person will be happier and probably more successful.
Yeah, you can't guarantee success. I mean, just because you love doing something doesn't mean anyone's going to pay you for it.
No.
So
well, it might be more successful in the way in which you relate to others. So
exactly. The chances are, if you're passionate about something, you'll do it better.
Yes.
Whether you get paid more for that's a whole other question. Yeah. Let's hope.
We can see the capitalist in you. Don't worry about that. I mean, we won't cut that bit out.
I don't want any of my team watching this and coming back for a raise or anything like that. But we actually ran this with our company. We got everybody together and we took people through this process of clarifying your values, and then we said to people, okay, now collectively in your departmental teams, work out what can you do to move your jobs in the direction of your values, your passions, etc. And they're still working on how they apply that, but people have said, we already do little things differently. And maybe you've got something in your job which is old hat for you, but is learning for me.
Yeah.
And so I think that there is some corporate stuff. A couple of companies have started to do purpose workshops, and they've found that people who feel purpose and engagement at work are more productive. They have better levels of well-being. They stay around with the organization longer. So there's a real win-win in finding this kind of purpose and engagement. Unilever have done a lot of work with their own internal program around this. They put about 65,000 people through it. So, and McKinsey are writing a lot about the need for purpose in leadership and direction. So I think, infusing a sense of purpose and engagement into work is a real contribution we can make, I think. I mean, it's unbelievable to me that 80% of people aren't engaged at work. That's such a shocking waste of human potential and happiness. We've got to do something about that.
What do you think to that, Kevin?
I think that is just so true. Now, there are two things that are floating around my mind at the moment. Number one says, how do we encourage people to be more engaged at work? But equally, how do you find more time to be engaged outside of work? Work can take up so much of your day. By the time you might only be at work 40% of it, but how much of your day is getting ready to go to work? If you're still going to the office, commuting to work, commuting home again. There's so little of the day left to do anything else. So
there is. I mean, what the stats show is that in the developed world, anyway, we spend about 25 to 40% of our time on kind of discretionary leisure. Right. Now, you don't want to spend all of that time rushing around. I've got to go to an art class, ballet, whatever it might be. There will be some vegetable time in there, I'm sure. But at the margin, if you can shift the hour a day, that makes a tremendous difference. You add that up across your lifetime, that's a lot of hours, a lot of proportion of your life. And I think the work stuff, you looked what happened in the pandemic period. People saved, 45 minutes an hour a day on average traveling. They immediately used half of that to work more. So and that's a choice. Is
that the right answer though? And that's an interesting one.
It's up to you, Kevin, as you'd expect my philosophy to be. I've had times in my career where I willingly sacrificed every hour for career progression. Early in my career, I worked tremendous hours. I had one job where I did 3 countries a week for 3 years. I moved my young family to another country. That was tough, but it was a conscious decision to accelerate my career. And what that gave me was the resources and the skills to go on and found my own business. Do I regret it? No.
No. Then you get the question of what actually constitutes a working day. If you move out of the office and you're working from home, you're probably having very solid, productive periods of time. And how many hours do you need to work during those solid, productive periods of time for that to represent a day? Now, where a day in the past was defined by, well, you arrive in the office at 9 o'clock in the morning, you go home at 5 o'clock, you've done some stuff that might have been concentrated work in that period, but you've had a lot of conversations, you've stood by the coffee machine a fair bit, and that I think is an interesting one. It is. And 5 hours solid work, 4 hours solid work, the equivalent of that 9 to 5 in the office.
And it depends what you're trying to achieve, I guess. But I always ask people, do you think Einstein stopped at 5? Do you think Serena Williams says, well, I've done 8 hours practice now, that's got to stop? Do you think, why are the Rolling Stones still touring?
Yeah. Well, they've never done a day's work in their lives.
If you love what you do, you don't have those boundaries. I mean, I'm not that kind of elevated group, but I run my own business. I'm always thinking about it at some level. The weekend is going in the back of my mind. But, when my grandson comes around 2 hours on a Monday, am I working a full 8 hours? No, I'm not.
No.
So I think that work life, what I don't like personally is rigid boundaries, because we've got this stuff going on in France, for example, where you've got an absolute rigid number of hours you can work in the week, and by the way, you're not allowed to communicate outside those hours. So you've got no flexibility then, right? Because if you have to do your work in those hours, then I can't allow you to go take your kids swimming on a Tuesday afternoon and work a bit in the evening. In my business, we kind of say, I don't care how many hours, I don't care how many holidays you take, just do your work. If you're not doing your work well, I'll let you know. I hire the kind of people who actually will work harder than I would ask them to work. It's why are we seeking? I mean, being involved in remote work for 30 years, if I look back over the 30 years, the single biggest objection to remote work was managers feeling they were losing control. And what we saw during the pandemic is actually people produced better in an environment where they had more autonomy.
Yeah. Your portfolio life.com is where you can find out more. We could literally talk for the rest of the morning as we're recording this, all about this, because it's about us. It's about how to become better in a way, and the best version of yourself. So I have really enjoyed you being on the Next 100 Days podcast, Kevan Hall.
So, Graham, how is your portfolio fulfilling you?
Right. So I think there are certain things that I absolutely want to improve on. And I'm working in the background on a new way of looking at the business that I've got and the way in which that would work. But I'll talk about that another time. And that basically means that I'm learning as well as doing things that are going to change that business. So that, from a business point of view, I see that's the energy that I'm putting into that side of it. From the health and well-being side of it, as you probably know, I've been doing my regular walks. So that's an example of, and it averages about 4 or 5 miles a day over a year, so it's pretty a reasonable level, and that's helping keep my signs down, the weight down, and scores down, etc. So those are the sort of little interventions. in terms of the community, I'm no longer a trustee of the local charity, so I've moved on from that. I've done my 5 years, and I wanted to spend a bit more time doing other things with my time. And so, yeah, I'm in a bit of a transition, Kevin. I don't know about you. I want to be able to.
I suppose I've gone through a transition because my life changed more or less completely, and coincidentally, it was around the time of COVID and lockdown, moving from doing consultancy work into working with Dan in Grow CFO, but gone through periods of a lot of building a business, taking up many hours. And my challenge right now is, how on earth do I find time to do all of the other stuff that I love doing outside of that? And that to me is something I'm constantly struggling with. And I'm really looking forward actually getting a hold of a copy of Kevan's book, because he's talked this morning about a number of subjects that I've been kind of researching on my own anyway.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I love about Kevan is that learner thing. And if you look at my key strengths from StrengthsFinder, number one strength is learner.
Yeah.
So we're very similar from that point of view.
Yeah, no, I
really relate to that thing where he says he'll pick something up, go really deep into it for a while and drop it. That's just the learner coming through. And I share that completely.
The negative to that is shiny object, and so therefore you have to be very careful about what you're learning. That doesn't mean to say you can't learn. It's just that, combining a bit of passion with that means that you've got a lot of plastic boxes in the roof, in the ceiling, or whatever it is in the loft.
I've got a lot of plastic boxes in the roof. They've mostly got trains in them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but that's another story that I would keep hidden. But today, Kevin, I've been Graham Arrowsmith.
I've been Kevin Appleby. Goodbye.
Goodbye.